Like waiting for your cue.
We've officially started. Okay.
Well, like when Disney begins, right? When they open, if you get there when the park opens, there's that really kind of booming voice that lets you know that the magical kingdom is open.
Welcome to the Disney Therapist Podcast. I don't know where I'm going to cut when it starts. I am Tyler Rich, one of your hosts. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I am here with...
So I am Alan Yeager, and I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor and a co-host here as well.
I don't know if we've given you that title officially yet.
Oh, wow.
No, I have. Yeah, it's all...
Wounded.
Yeah. So this is our second episode. This episode, we're going to kind of dive into Toy Story. I wanted to, in the first few episodes, to kind of branch into a bunch of different things. Inside Out was our first episode, so if you've heard that, go back and listen. Mm-hmm. That's just a good entry level for, like, psychology. Toy Story, we're going to do that. We have a Marvel one, I think, is our next week's episode, and then we have to find a Disney movie, an actual Disney movie.
Yeah.
That's Disney branded we should at some point real soon. So with that, what are your first thoughts about, we'll just jump right in, like, what... Toy Story.
Yeah. So immediately when I sat down, I was thinking about, okay, what kind of things am I going to run into? The first thing that popped out was like identity crisis and difficulty adjusting. So what I really pulled out from that was seeing Woody and how jealous he is, mm-hmm. and how he doesn't communicate anything that's going on. That he kind of takes ownership and he tries to control all the situations and how it goes horribly wrong.
He's a control freak.
Yes.
That's... So I went back. How old were you when this came out?
Ooh, if you can tell me what year it came out.
You don't even remember what year. Oh, that tells you I'm so much older than you.
Right.
It came out in 96.
Okay, so I was 7.
95, 96.
6 or 7.
Came out in November of 95.
Okay.
This is not necessarily accurate. This is called Tyler's brain knowledge.
So 6. So I was roughly in first grade.
Wow.
Yeah.
I was in middle school.
But I remember watching it when it came out, just because it
was big. When we saw it, we were living in Colorado still, and I can remember the lines waiting to get in. And we didn't see very many movies, and for me, like that was the first like people waiting in line to see a movie.
Okay,
that kind of sticks out. So when I think back about the movie, the first thing that I like remembered is the people had like Buzz's identity crisis throughout the whole movie.
Yeah. So
he has this huge like, I'm a toy, I'm not a toy, I'm a toy, I'm not a toy. You know, Mrs. Nesbitt that comes out at the end, and then I thought a lot about like the emotions that might exist. That Woody is jealous.
Yeah.
There's like a lot of avoidance of like real stuff, and then really like a lack of communication, mm-hmm. because they don't really talk about like what's really going on.
Yeah. And I think like a big jumping off point there is noticing how Woody believes that he can dictate kind of the narrative of the room. And that was something that was kind of apparent right from the get-go that I noticed. So one of the things that I think really stuck out is when you see that montage of him being like the primary toy being played with, the whole room is made after him. I started seeing him as the hero of the film. But that quickly fades. But we go from that montage scene of him, being the hero, winning, being played with by Andy, and then when Andy steps away, he is in charge of the room. And something that I was thinking about was how we might project one identity and have it like as our confidence. So one thing that I kind of wrote that was important was is him being the hero, is that what dictates who's in charge of the room? And spoiler alert, with other Toy Story films, I feel like whoever the main toy is dictating the room. And I thought that was really curious. 'Cause that's not popular vote. That's just, you've been chosen, so you are right.
That really, Toy Story is a story about a dictatorship.
Yes.
Is what you're saying. So, more or less. Yeah, so it just hit me, and maybe I can articulate it too a little bit better. One of the thoughts prior, or just kind of like thinking overall thing before we dive into like specifics, is Woody's super anxious.
Yeah.
But at the beginning of the movie, everybody else is anxious too. Right? Yeah. Like it's almost like he like it's almost, if we think like inside, right? If we give our anxiety control, mm-hmm. if anxiety's the one that's sitting on the bed and the whole room's themed
Yeah.
to the anxious part of you, all the other parts of you start to become anxious, right? Like all the toys are freaking out at the beginning of the movie because of the birthday party.
Okay.
At the end of the movie, Woody's not in charge anymore.
Mm-hmm.
There's no anxiousness.
That's a really interesting insight, and I can hear that. When we talk about dictatorships, unfortunately, right? The leader projects what everybody's supposed to feel, and so if he is anxious, even if he's not overt about his anxiety, everybody picks up on that feeling, and that's where the room begins.
Well, and that like he calls like the meeting right at the beginning, so it's okay. We're gonna do A, B, C, and oh, by the way, the birthday party's kind of been moved up to today. Like it's almost like instead of heading on to something like straight on, right?
Yeah.
Which is what we tend to do if we're anxious. Like we don't necessarily actually talk about stuff straight on. We'll avoid it.
Yeah.
And then we kind of like try to just get through it as quickly as possible.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know. That just kind of hit me. I don't think I even had that in my notes.
No, but
It's like all the toys are anxious because he's anxious.
Yeah, that's beautiful, because what you're talking about is, as a leader, he doesn't really have a very strong foundation, that he kind of gets through things by just approaching it in the here and now and just dealing with what comes, and that's very anxious, not having any idea of how to handle a situation, how to talk about it. We don't do any kind of damage control or any kind of briefing.
Absolutely. So let's jump into the movie and actually like look at some of the plot points. What are some of the first things that really stand out for you? Like if we're going to maybe break down the movie a little chronologically.
So definitely beginning where we had left off. Woody being identified as the leader of the room, and moving into what you're saying, I did have comments about the anxiousness and how Woody was very dismissive with interacting with everybody else's, and how one of the barriers, I think, shields that he had to anxiety was identifying as Andy's favorite toy. And so since he's Andy's favorite toy, he doesn't have to worry about those things. So I think that what you're talking about, where he doesn't confront it, he doesn't hit it head on, that's because he's never had to. And he's over-identified with that role of being the favorite toy, and so he has no idea how to not be the favorite toy.
That over-identifying with a label or a role can kind of keep you stuck, especially if that gets challenged.
Absolutely. So putting all the eggs in one basket. And so with him, I think that by being the favorite toy and having that as his identity, he didn't know how to be anything else. And so we really see that start shining through as they anxiously sit by the radio and they're listening for what toys come in. Because if I remember correctly, some of the commentary he has is when they unwrap the gifts, when it's not something that threatens him, he's able to pass it off and act cool.
Yeah. I wrote down the quote in here that I think, or that was what you wrote. I was like, I wrote that? Wow, that's pretty cool. That's because what you just said is that's quoted when he's like, I'm not worried, you should be worried. And you're like, of course you're not worried, you're his favorite, right? And then it's not how much we're played with, it's how we're here for Andy. But that's not true, right? Like he doesn't believe that because none of his actions actually align with that at all in the whole movie. So it's like, I think it speaks volumes to how sometimes we can say one thing, but our actions don't ever align with what we actually think.
Yeah. I think we project what we think things should be, but not necessarily what we're feeling. And that's really kind of what causes that dissonance and probably fosters some of this anxiety, because he doesn't feel he's allowed to talk about these things now.
Yeah. I think too, like one of the things that stood out is with Rex was like, I hope I don't get replaced with another dinosaur toy. And it's sometimes we start to tell ourselves the story that keeps us stuck, right? Like we'll look for reasons to be anxious.
Okay.
And maybe that's not even said the right way. Like we'll see events, and we'll project like our biggest fears onto them, which then keeps us stuck thinking just about those fears and the anxiety, which is kind of how anxiety works.
Okay, I get what you're saying. No, it took me a second. Sometimes I think in pictures, and so I needed a second to dissect that. And it's we have this narrative and we identify with the narrative, and so what happens is we talk about that fear, and instead of allowing ourselves to talk about how we're going to handle that situation if it comes, creating this imagined space where we can start to cultivate strength, we then try to think of all the ways we can slink by it. And so I think that's what you're leading towards. That anxiety is this debilitation to engage with the things that cause us anxiousness or nervousness of any kind of way.
So what did you feel about Woody as the movie started?
So I haven't been shy about this in our kind of dialogue beforehand, but I really couldn't find myself liking Woody when I was trying to analyze the film. But being 6 or 7, I loved Woody. Woody was one of my favorites. But this time around, immediately, I saw the cockiness, the arrogance, and quite frankly, some of that like narcissistic, like I kind of rule the show. Nobody can step in. No one can do it well.
So Woody was your favorite when you were young?
Yes.
Okay. See, it's funny because I liked Buzz better from the beginning, but I felt the same exact way in rewatching this. I was like, if it wasn't Tom Hanks, I don't think Woody would have been as likable at all. Like, there's something. Obviously, we have this relationship with Tom Hanks, so it's so much easier to like enjoy it because it's his voice. But he just constantly was like high strung and in control and kind of rude to people and. It was really all about him. Like his relationships with other people were based about what he was thinking and feeling.
Yeah. What just came to me was how inauthentic Woody felt. And so I wonder, because I know as a kid, I think it was that confidence was something that was really inspiring. To have that kind of control and to walk into a situation and feel like you know what's going on. But as an adult, I think as I realized that kind of control has a lot behind it, I think that I immediately picked up on that and was starting to look at Woody as more of a wounded individual. So as much as I'm talking about like all this, like these negative components of what we're seeing in Woody, it really does come down to he's wounded and stuck. So just like we're talking about with an anxious client, it's someone who has a narrative of this is how things work. When it works this way, everything's fine, and not allowing space to talk about what if it's not this, which I think leads into kind of the next chronological big moment, which is when Buzz shows up.
Yeah.
So not even, the show, they do a really good job, I think, of cultivating the nervousness and the anxiety because right, the radio's off. They're fumbling to turn it back on. The batteries bounce out of it, right? So you're already kind of on the edge of your seat wondering what is going on.
Yeah.
And then, boom, it's this big new shiny toy. Kids burst into the room, knock Woody off the bed, and plant this new toy right in his spot.
Symbolically replacing him.
Right? And even as I'm talking about it, I can notice that my anxiety is kind of building. The way I'm framing it, it's... having to confront something so quickly, and it's not just that it's shown up in your space, but you've been knocked down a peg. In a way, his ego really got confronted immediately.
Absolutely. Well, and so what I wrote down was that space when the kids leave and they start interacting, right? The first thing that everybody does is starts to compare Buzz to Woody, right?
Yes.
Like, oh, he has a laser when you have a laser. Oh, he has like the voice box. You just have a pull string, right? There's this immediate comparison, which then drives more of Woody's like insecurities. And Buzz isn't self-aware enough to even like know anything about this stuff.
Yeah.
And I think then it goes into like the flight piece, which I'll talk about in a second. But I think that speaks volumes to what we let happen so much in our lives, right? That we let other people start to compare the differences, which there's nothing wrong with seeing compared differences, but then are we now comparing all these parts of ourselves to others that then make us feel insecure? Because if we're comparing to others, say, oh, we're not new and shiny. We don't have the best voice box. We don't have the best thing. I'm not as attractive. I'm not as smart. I'm not as articulate, right? Yeah. Those statements we say to ourselves is our own comparison, and we have to find a way to like live almost like Buzz and be like unaware of that stuff. Because when we are constantly comparing, we're going to stay stuck and we're going to feel insecure. And then we can see Woody's actions for the rest of the movie because of that insecurity don't work out well for him.
I think it's really beautiful that you took the aspects of the toys and really talked about them in tangible ways that we deal with that. It really struck me when you talked about the articulation, like, because comparing like the voice of the voice of Buzz versus the voice of Woody, I think that was really deep. And I just wanted to kind of stop and kind of recognize that.
Super deep.
It was. And if a client was coming in and made that connection, I think that you would really help enliven that space and talk about it. But I think that kind of pulling up for a second, kind of generally what you're talking about is how we can assign worth to some external factors that we might not have one part we might not have control over, and then another we have control over, but it takes us having that consciousness of saying, wow, I didn't like that comparison. And so while Woody can't maybe change his pull string, someone could hear, wow, this person's really articulate and that's valued, and I want more of that.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that's really beautiful about that one moment, is there's all this depth to something that I think happens in probably 30 seconds.
Yes, probably 30, yeah.
And just kind of as we joke, I think that this, I wrote down in parentheses, quotations, laser envy. And as a kid, I would have never got it. And so having Mr. Potato Head step in and really kind of instigate there, I think that was something that I started to pick up on in the first part of the movie.
How much do we let other people instigate our insecurities because of other people's comparison?
Yes, that if we don't have a good foundation of where our worth comes from, that someone can really step in and trample all over that. And as we see it happen in Toy Story, he gives Mr. Potato Head a lot of control over his emotions because he's unwilling to talk about his insecurities.
Absolutely. Well, I think he's unwilling to even look at them himself.
Yes.
Right? Which, when we end up doing Toy Story 2, will be interesting because we can refer back to this, because Toy Story 2 he finds all these securities in who he is.
Yeah.
But in this movie, he runs just so insecure. In that same scene, one of the things I think is Buzz has such a strong belief in himself that he can fly.
Yes.
And he flies, but obviously the way it's shot and it's made is like he's not really flying, but like
he's following the style.
Yeah, he's following the style. But it makes you think, and the reason I wrote it down is because I was like, sometimes when we have the belief in ourselves, it doesn't mean we're going to be able to do anything we want, but we can have a level of confidence to put ourselves out there, right?
Yeah.
That I would say even for us, like putting it on YouTube or doing a podcast, right?
Yeah.
There's this level of like, do I know enough? Can I shoot this enough?
Yeah.
Like, am I going to be articulate enough? And that narrative of not enough can keep us from doing it. But Buzz didn't have any of that. He just believed.
Yeah.
And he did it. And he flew.
Okay. I think believe was such it really struck me, because if I remember correctly, they use that with a lot of Disney branding. Believe, right? There's magic in believing. And if we're to take it to kind of a deep place just for a second, quantum mechanically, right?
Not the deep place I was expecting you to go, but quantum mechanics, sure.
If we set out, if we allow ourselves to do something, there's like this response in the world that kind of parts away and gives us some space. Now, it's not going to do everything for us, but we can start to build that confidence as we see things kind of pan out. Being able to take that initial flight, and even though that there's going to be a lot of growth that we talk about with Buzz, that initial flight is a precursor for the actual flight at the end.
Yep.
So in that same way, because we believed, because we saw ourselves do something like it, we could challenge ourselves to even do more.
And I think I looked at Buzz at the beginning to it, which is he was a little narcissistic, a little full of himself.
A little
bit.
And
I don't think it was narcissism in the sense of he thought he was better than other people. I think he was just unaware, right?
Yes.
He was unaware of where other people were, like that he's not a space toy, like, or he's not a space ranger, like he's a toy. And that unawareness led to this intense belief that he could do whatever he wanted. And then his journey through the movie that's challenged.
Yeah.
And I think that to me is a warning sign for having strong beliefs, because I totally self-identify as Buzz. Like some just personal stuff. Like I'm probably overly confident, and that could probably come across as like arrogant or egotistical, or a narcissist. So I'm constantly trying to like check in with where other people are at, what are other people thinking, so that my level of confidence doesn't come across as than narcissism. And that's one of the biggest things that I see a lot is people have problems. Like a lot of my clients have issues sometimes not being self-confident.
Yeah.
And there's this fear that if I am confident in myself, I'm going to be a narcissist. And I don't think that's the case.
Yeah.
Because if we're asking that question, am I going to be a narcissist? You're not going to be a narcissist, right?
Yeah.
Because narcissists don't ask those things. And I think that's the fear we have, right? If we have this level of confidence, we might come across how Buzz did at the beginning, which is kind of aloof, kind of above it all.
Okay.
And as he goes through his journey, he realizes he's not. But even in the clips that's following, Woody's super insecure, but Buzz is interacting with everybody in a really fun way. Like they're lifting weights, they're doing things. Like everybody really likes Buzz in the montage.
Yeah.
And I think that's because he's super confident in himself, but he can still build relationships. So for me, one of the big takeaways from the movie is we can be confident in ourselves.
Yeah.
But we don't and that doesn't necessarily mean we're a narcissist or it's bad.
Yeah.
We just have to also know our limits. And I think he learns that when he jumps off the balcony and loses his arm and becomes Mrs. Nesbitt.
So teasing, about a lot of depth that I want to ask you about Buzz. But before we leave from there, I actually want to talk about the concept you're talking about, which is social awareness.
Yeah. That
some of what Buzz isn't able to do at the beginning, I think that's what his challenge is in the movie, is to take a look around. That something that he doesn't do is since he is so in his own world, he can miss cues and he can miss kind of where other people are coming from.
Yeah.
And that doesn't have to take away from his belief that he's a space ranger. And I think he does a good blending of that, and that's kind of what you hint at, is that he is a bit out of touch, but because he's authentic, he's able to interact with people where he wants to interact. Working out, that's something that he found was valuable, so he was able to participate with the people around him.
Yeah.
He wasn't worried about Rex, for example. One of the things I really highlighted was I think it was really nurturing for him to help Rex with his roar. And I think that really highlights the difference between our two kind of heroes here. With Woody, who was trying to invalidate Rex's roar, kind of like this sign of, I'm above you, you don't scare me. Mm-hmm. And he didn't give him any hints. He didn't give him any kind of help with the roar. Where Buzz is not threatened by how strong Rex can be, and therefore helps promote his roar. And we hear this beautiful dinosaur roar that kind of took me by surprise, if I'm being honest. As I was saying that, I forgot how loud it got.
That you said the word authentic, and I think that resonated a lot because Buzz is super authentic, and he's as authentic as he can be, knowing who he is in that moment.
Yeah.
But it also, I think, demonstrates that there was a lot he didn't know about himself.
Yeah. Moving
forward, and that you can still be authentic with who you are and still have the possibility to learn parts of yourself.
Yeah. I think both of them were faced with the challenge of making space for other perceptions, other stories, and making way for interacting with everybody, not just in self-interest.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for listening and watching. If you're watching this on YouTube, go and hit subscribe. Leave us a comment down below about your favorite toy from Toy Story, whether it's this one or the next three. If you're listening to this in podcast, if you could go and make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode.
Where we had left off and where where I want to take it is the introduction of Sid, and how Sid, I think he's tying a firecracker to an army man, and we saw all the toys.
Combat Carl.
Yes.
I just remember all these names.
No, that's wonderful. I am so much more into themes and stories, and it takes me a while to get a name.
Yeah.
But all the toys stop what they're doing and they go out the window and they talk about it. And we see Buzz get very, very aggravated and very energized and wanting to help. Mm-hmm. And I think this sparks that awful idea that Woody has, which, if I remember correctly, he uses RC to bump Wood out, Buzz out the window.
In a scene or two later, Andy's mom's like, "Let's go," and he's like, "Let's bring a toy to the pizza port."
Yeah.
And then Woody, in his insecurity, decided to take a jump.
Yeah, and not just his insecurity, I think his possessiveness.
Yeah.
And that's something that I thought was really interesting, and it's kind of a big leap, but that's that's kind of the same themes that we hear in like domestic abuse. You know, he had this idea that Andy was his, and this is the first time that we've seen him take that kind of control and trying to claim something as only his.
Yeah, I didn't think of it through the lens of like what really unhealthy relationships look like with power and control.
Yeah.
Because we do know in abusive relationships, it's about a power dynamic.
Yeah.
Right? And that when somebody tends to be the perpetrator of abuse, they want to have power and control over someone else. Yeah. And Woody had lost all his power and control and had this moment where he thought he could just push Buzz behind the desk and no harm would come from it.
Yep.
Didn't necessarily turn out that way.
No. And it's scary because I think even before that point, there was just a couple moments where he would say things like "stay away from Andy," taking Andy's authority and control or autonomy, really, right? So he's trying to shape, his external world to fit that internal narrative we were talking about earlier. So this is what happens when I think we get too rigid with what we think the world like works like, instead of allowing ourselves to be flexible and going, "Wow, this is the world now. How do I interact with it?"
And also, I think it just hit me that we said at the beginning that Woody talked about how this is words elude me sometimes. Woody talked about like it's just about we're all Andy's toys. It's just about making him happy and being played with.
Yeah.
And how inauthentic he actually comes across almost the whole movie, and that this is like the representation of what he really believes, which is he wants to be the center of attention. Yeah. That it's what he was always saying was not necessarily what he actually believed, which is that inauthenticity, which I think teaches us the lesson of what authenticity actually means, which is like who I am and what I say actually align.
Yeah. Right?
Like the more authentic we are, because we hear that word all the time thrown out, like be authentic, be authentic. Yeah. What the heck does that mean? But authenticity is who I am.
Yeah.
Is how I show up. Like they're one in the same. And who I am, might not be shiny and like might not be new. Like I might have an old drawstring and I might, have some rips and I might be dirty. But if I show up that way, that's who I am. And I think that that's a great lesson that we can learn is like show up with how you are, even your flaws.
And so my mind goes to, but Tyler, how? How do I show up knowing that maybe I'm a little bit more raggedy and I don't have the flashy toys? How do I do that?
You just show up. You do it, right? I always talk about like the work is showing up.
Yeah.
Right? The work is being vulnerable.
Yes.
Right? That really to be authentic, I have to be vulnerable and I have to know who I am. Right? I have to recognize I'm a little dirty. I do have a pull string. I do have, right? Like I have to show up with who I am, which is, I think, the character arc that Woody goes through is towards the end of the movie, he is just showing up for him. Like he realizes he just needs to show up.
Yeah. And anytime that I hear the word vulnerable, my mind always pairs it with the word risk.
Yeah.
And so to show up and to be vulnerable means that we have to risk being seen as ourselves, so that we can see how people respond to us. Because I think that gives us so much information. And I think that's the scary part. And maybe where Woody and we fall short is because we have it in our minds that the way we see ourselves or the things that are authentic about us don't have a space to exist or to be accepted. And we really can't know that until we take that step out and try. And I think that's where he built this, this internal world where I need to be the favorite toy. Because the favorite toy means that none of these other things that I know about myself to be true matter.
Yeah. When I think when Woody comes to this realization that he sees himself for who he is right after all the Sid's crazy toys. I don't know. They're not crazy. Special toys that he's destroyed and they've put back together come and put Buzz back together.
Yeah.
And it's almost as if we were to use it as like symbolic language, right? Yeah. He saw that there could be all these different like beauty in all these different parts, and they even if you don't think it fits or you're scared of it at the beginning, it can serve you. Mm-hmm. So he's learned all these things, and then now he has this realization that it's okay to be him.
Yeah.
And then that's where Buzz rescues him, and they start to go into the third act of the movie.
Yeah. I think that's the when he initially gets to Sid's room, he has that prejudice about the toys.
Yeah.
He's judging them on their appearance, and that really is thematic, right? It's the what you look like or how you're interacted with that indicates your worth. And he has that restorative function when he sees that they're just trying to help everybody else out. When you talk about that third act, I'm a little hazy because it's when. Is that before the? That's definitely before the moment where he gets strapped to the rocket.
It's right about the same time.
Is it?
Yeah, that's kind of the catalyst for the third. Because when Sid gets them, they go into the house, and then Buzz has his identity crisis and becomes Mrs. Nesbit when he loses his arm.
Yes.
And then in trying to escape,
Yeah.
Buzz is in this existential crisis of who am I, where am I going to go?
Yeah.
And Woody's still self-absorbed.
Yep.
Until those toys come and put him back together. And that, I think, starts off the 5-minute interchange of Woody's character. But Buzz is still kind of lost. And then when Woody becomes vulnerable with saying, you're special, you're better, you can escape,
Yeah.
Buzz shows up for him, and then they start working together.
Okay, let's put a pin in that.
Okay.
Because I think that the Miss Nesbit part is such a rich place. Let's kind of delve into why he gets there, and so that it's that scene, and it's kind of burned into my mind right now, so it's really interesting. Of when he steps into the room and he sees the commercial, the thoughts that I had, and it was really important, was Buzz realizing that he's not unique.
Yeah.
And how that was very splintering for his ego. And because that was so wounding, and he didn't want to, I don't think he wanted to embrace that. He saw the thread, and instead of trying to challenge it, he took the exact opposite, the extreme, and he tried to jump off the banister and fly.
And how often do we not like the truth when it's presented to us, so we blatantly ignore it?
Yes. AKA Woody's entire arc up until this point.
Yeah.
So what we're shown is that both characters coming from different sides, how unhealthy it can be when we ignore some of the real world feedback that we get.
Yeah.
And absolutely, because that risk, right? That fear of, oh man, I have a part to play in this. I can do something about this. But I don't think that's our initial thought. I think our initial thought is this part of us sucks. And we forget that we can be deliberate, we can work on that. And we begin to, we try to reclaim that identity by something drastic.
Yep.
Right? We saw Woody do it by trying to become the favorite toy by knocking Buzz out. And then we also see it with Buzz. We're trying to retain the innocence by jumping off the banister. And so what do we see afterwards? We see a psychotic break.
Yeah.
Right? We see this really dissociative person who is struggling to figure out who he is anymore. And that
complete loss of identity.
Yes. And I think that, so now when we speed back up to where you were, why that scene was so important. Because I think what happens is, as Woody starts to realize, right? Actually, we do have to take one step back, because there's one more interaction that Woody has, I think, that solidifies that he is going about things all wrong. And it's the moment where he asks Buzz for a hand.
Yeah.
And Buzz literally throws his arm up there. So yet again, we see Woody trying to manipulate the external facts.
Yep.
And he gets caught. And what he was hoping was going to be a reunification was just furthering the rejection.
That when we are manipulative for our own needs, we'll lose our lifeline to others.
Yeah. And this is where, I'm going to encourage people to catch parts of our conversation about Inside Out. Because now as we move into this act, what we see Woody do is we see Woody connect to his feelings, and he shares that he doesn't feel shiny, he doesn't feel new.
Yeah.
And he talks about how Buzz has all those things and how Buzz has a life that he can live. And that helps Buzz find a new identity. I think he looks at the Andy tag on his foot, and he sees that while he might not be the Space Ranger, he can be a good toy.
Well, he's Andy's Space Ranger, right?
Yes, making it more personal. So I don't need to be the Space Ranger, but maybe if I'm a Space Ranger to Andy, maybe that's good enough. And man, you hear that a lot in depth work, that we have this fantasy and we think that that's the only way to feel good. But when we find that there's a good enough way of living, right? Buzz, like it's interesting because we're talking about toys that are animated.
Yeah.
And this is the moment where I feel like Buzz comes to life. He steps out of this really innocent, like, Space Ranger to real toy / Space Ranger.
Like the depth of who he is starts to actually exist.
Yeah. He is not living up to an identity prescribed anymore. Now he's starting to make his own.
Yeah.
And that vulnerable space, that sharing of emotions, one, inspires Buzz and also gives Buzz an opportunity to connect to what Woody's feeling, and then thus they begin finally the adventure together.
When we finally start to accept who we are, we can actually go deeper with who we are.
Yes, we can, and that's the risk, right? That risk that we were talking about. Woody took a risk and said, hey, you know what? I'm in this down and out place anyway. I don't know what's going to happen. So what do I have to lose? And so he shares, and what he realizes is there was nothing to lose, but just a lot to gain.
Yeah. Though, as you were saying this, something that hit me that I didn't think of till this moment, which is, I think one of the reasons why this movie stands the test of time and is considered one of the best movies ever made, right? It's in the AFI's like top 100 movies ever made. And has great Rotten Tomatoes, has all these things, right? There's something about this movie that resonates, and I think you said, oh, it's like the same theme, right? Which we're not in entertainment, right? So we don't write screenplays, we don't do this type of thing, but the theme keeps repeating, right? All the characters are experiencing almost the same type of theme, which is loss of like identity, discovering identity, loss of identity, discovery of identity, right? That theme keeps replaying. Yeah. And the reason I kind of say that now is because I think that's what we actually do in sessions with clients is we start to look at themes, and sometimes certain themes resonate with us. Mm-hmm. And those themes, once we identify them in ourselves, will continue to repeat until we find a balance in them. And we have to find like how to just accept it, kind of like as the characters do. And this is one of the reasons I think we wanted to do these types of podcasts, because when we start looking at these themes, this is what we do in session all the time. Yeah. And we all have to be curious about like, what are the themes in our life? What are the challenges we face? What's our journey? Yeah. And that's really challenging to look at. And we see it through movies. So if like if you resonate with this movie more, then that there might be some identity stuff. Like I always, out of all the Toy Story movies, might resonate with like the third one the most, which is about like longing and family, and that's a big part of my stuff is like family and closeness and togetherness. Mm-hmm. What about you? What do you think? Ooh, sorry, I took it to a whole different.
No. So I definitely want to validate the conversations about how important a good story is, because I think that's how we find hope. That's also how we connect to, this is where I could go from here. And so a story that allows us to look at, challenging our identity and how we might have to make space for new things that come in and seeing it work out, that it's really important. And so I think that Toy Story, I'm moving to the next part, I think Toy Story 3 is meaningful for me too, but in a completely different way. And this might indicate some inner work that I have to do, because I'm part of the group that really can't like Toy Story 3 just because of that moment at the end when Andy gives away his toys. Because I think that I have such an inner child that I am struggling to figure out how to retain like my toys into my adulthood. So I think that movie has the same significance, because it highlights how important some of those things are. But to pull back into this one, we'll get to Toy Story 3. We'll do a whole, like, it sounds like we're going to clash a lot on that one. I think I'm ready for it. But in this one, and as you were saying that, the thing that really popped in my head was the song. Mm-hmm. You've Got a Friend in Me. Like, I didn't think about this prior, but how poignant that song is for the conclusion of this movie, which is... you can have a friend in someone, right? That's a very interesting terminology, because I think that what that is that you hold space within me. And what that takes is you have to deposit that in there. You have to put that effort. And so as we see that happen, I think the movie moves into its kind of last piece, and we see them work together for the first time.
I think that was, for me, that sounded like really poetic, beautiful language, which is like putting a part, like friendship is putting a part of yourself into your friend, and your friend holding space.
Yes.
And what we talked about Inside Out, and I think is valid too, is what a vulnerable act that is to like, one, give of yourself to someone, but then the other person create space for you, and then have to do the same in return. And I think when the rocket takes off at the end, right, and he goes, oh, the rockets are going to explode. He goes, not today, and they start flying. And he's like, oh, you're flying. And he's like, no, falling with style, which is what Woody said to him earlier. And then Woody responds with something Buzz said. So there was this complete space, which is they, through conflict, worked out a friendship, and then they started holding space for each other. And I think that's represented in that like beautiful scene.
Yeah, it's very validating, so by allowing him to share and creating this trusting relationship, they can signal right to each other that like your perspective, where you come from, matters. And I think that is a beautiful conclusion, because what it says is that sometimes it's murky. Sometimes when we are trying to connect, when we're trying to be authentic, it doesn't always pan out. But much like when you're forging something, right, it needs to be hammered out. It gets really hot, and you shape it and you mold it into something. And so in that same way, I think the movie kind of shows that we start from these two characters who are stuck in their ways. Not even stuck. If we're talking about it in a nurturing way, they are informed by their experiences, and they have this really high conflict thing that happens, and it's challenging them to make space for somebody else. And they initially don't know how. And the whole journey is eventually leading to learning how to. So at the conclusion, right, when they're in that rocket and they share, he says falling with style, and Woody says something about, no, you're flying. It's like this beautiful moment where you're like, it's like that heart-wrenching moment where you're like, finally.
The thing that we've been longing for, right, happens, and we're at peace. Like, it's that relief. Okay, guys, before we finish the podcast, I wanted to jump on here and say thank you again for watching so much. We did launch a Patreon to help kind of increase the podcast volume. So on our Patreon, we do lots of giveaways. We put all our show notes. You have Q&As with us. You'll actually get to pick what content we cover, what topics we cover, anything around mental health or Disney combined, all that stuff. So you can check it out through the link on our YouTube page or on our website at thedisneytherapist.com. You can just hit support. It will take you straight to our Patreon page. Okay, so kind of as we wrap up, what are there any other moments from the movie? Are there any other characters or anything that really stood out that we maybe didn't touch base with so far? Because we really talked just about like the main characters and kind of their journey. So, go for it.
Absolutely. So Sid, right? Sid, I think, is such
my favorite.
He's such an iconic character, and something that you kind of indicated and wrote down that I really want to ask about is that you called Sid Andys' shadow. And I wonder if you can explain what that even means, and then talk about what you mean.
Okay. So in depth work, which we do a lot of depth work, right? Which is looking at the parts of ourselves and like archetypes and unconscious and all these things, right? Shadow is the way, at least I always conceptualize it, which might not be the Jungian definition or whatever we want to say, right?
Jung would say whatever way you do it
is That's such a good therapist. Whatever, okay with you. I'm guilty of doing that all the time. So for me, a shadow is, if we're looking at a light, anything that's behind us that we can't see is the shadow, right? It's the part of ourselves that we don't know, we can't see. Sometimes our shadow is nice parts of ourselves that we reject, and sometimes our shadow are not nice parts of ourselves that we reject. Like I think I said earlier today, right? Like I'm a hard worker. I'm kind of a go-getter. I'm kind of maybe a little too overconfident, right? My shadow is lazy. Like I reject the lazy part of me. So when I see laziness in others, it irritates the crap out of me. So that's kind of like the entry level of like understanding for me what shadow is.
So shadow is like the part that attacks your consciousness. So I think a way that, keeping it thematic with Disney, that I always like to talk about it is shadow is scar, right? Like Mufasa literally talks about, the shadowy space that we don't go towards, right? This is Mufasa indicating that we don't go there.
Yeah.
And so then we have Scar, who loves being in the shadow, who eventually actually takes down Mufasa. So it's a part of us that, if left unchecked, can take us down. So when you talk about Sid being Andy's shadow, I wonder if you can elaborate on what you picked up on.
So the way I looked at Sid, Andy likes to play with toys.
Yeah.
He has an innocence about him. Obviously, there's no character development for Andy.
Yeah.
Right? Up until even, the third movie, right?
Yeah,
he
there's a bit.
he has a level of character development. But we don't really learn about, we just kind of have the experiences through the toys with him.
Yeah.
And through their experiences, he's loving, he's kind, he takes care of them, right? He plays with him. He serves the purpose of the toy, right?
Yeah.
Sid does the exact opposite. He doesn't play with them. He doesn't love them. He destroys them.
Yeah.
Right. For me, which was very opposite from Andy. And I always like to think of like our psyche on a spectrum.
Yeah.
Right. So if we're embracing one far end of the spectrum, the other side is maybe the shadow or the dark side. Right. If I'm so loving and so kind and so playful, is there a part of me that wants to destroy it? And I think of like even my own childhood. I had like a classic Superman toy.
Okay.
And I threw it up to the ceiling one time and it busted and like went into a bunch of pieces. And there's a part of me that was sad, but then there's a part of me that was like, that was kind of fun. Right? So there's this piece that I wonder if like Sid in a way is the dark side of what Andy could be.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Like that he likes to destroy toys.
Yeah.
Maybe he's not super nice. Right? Like when you think about him taking care of his sister, like he's always nice to her, he does that. Sid's not, right?
Yeah.
That maybe Sid could be that dark side that is in Andy, but never comes out.
So, first off, I want to validate it's okay to break DC toys because it's not Marvel. And then, kind of in the second, as we talk about Sid, and right, there isn't that much character development, but something really stood out for me with Sid, and it's when I think he's kind of picking on his sister and kind of breaking her toys. She calls out for mom, and immediately Sid goes into denying his behavior. And so when we talk about shadow and we talk about like the the light side and the shadowy side, we're not talking good and bad.
Yeah.
And so I think what allows or affords Andy to be in the lighter side is he gets that love, right? We see mom love him. We see him having a working relationship with his family. That's minimal content as we see it. And the one thing that we see of Sid is that he immediately has to go into defense mode. And I think that kind of pays respects to maybe Sid doesn't get the space that Andy gets. And so maybe this, the destruction and all that kind of leans more on the desire for control that he doesn't have.
Oh, absolutely.
So I think that, right, showing what it could look like to have one side of us and how it kind of constellates, and understanding kind of what fosters those experiences. Kind of continuing with Sid, it's an interesting kind of comment that I've heard, right? How do you think Sid responds when he realizes that the toys have consciousness?
I think he peed his pants. I think that's what he did.
He runs screaming for sure, right? And I think rightfully so. If I saw my toys come to life, I would. But how do we face the consequences of, oh my gosh, toys are alive, look at what I've done?
Which really the theme or the question, if we're taking it to like a psychological level, which is what happens when I realize something that I've been doing is damaging or hurtful, and how do I become okay with my past? How do I build remorse around the things that I've done and be okay with some of the decisions I've made and move forward? Yeah. That's a hard question.
It is hard, and maybe it was just kind of a hint at, I think maybe what he says, when he comes to life and he kind of throws this like consciousness and talks about his behavior. Maybe we're reaching, but maybe
we're definitely reaching, but it's okay.
That him, running is not just that the toys came alive, but also, being faced with everything that he has done with them.
Yeah. Being faced with, I've killed all these toys that were alive.
Yeah.
That could be pretty traumatic.
Yeah, and in lieu of continuing to overreach, does that not make him also a perpetrator of what he's been maybe receiving?
Absolutely.
As we talk about what what may, right? This is a thing, since we have to take some liberties here because they don't flesh out his character. Some of the things that when we're not maybe aware of in shadow, how we can perpetuate those same things.
Well, it just speaks to a lack of awareness, right? When we aren't aware, we don't recognize what we're doing or why we're doing it. Yeah. And that's clearly demonstrated in him.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's a stretch really to be like, he probably doesn't have the best parents. Like, he's getting like rockets and he's blowing things up in the backyard. And dad, had sodas, falling asleep in the middle of the day, watching TV, right? Yeah. Like, I know, like, a lot of things are implied that Sid doesn't have the best household.
Yeah.
So I think it is kind of almost sometimes a disservice to throw so many things at somebody who acts so poorly.
Yeah.
Versus like humanizing, like obviously there's a level of struggle there.
Yeah.
You can't do like there's.
Yeah.
We're not critical of the movie at all, but like it just shows that like there's everything's so complicated. Yeah. Right. Like that we're dissecting this and looking at all these things to make it easier.
Yeah.
For us to understand parts of ourselves, but even in looking at these stories, these myths, to understand ourselves, we're realizing it's all really complicated. There's so many pieces we could break apart.
Yeah, that sometimes, it's just about having a hint dropped, and that insight is enough for us to get curious. Just like how we're having this really kind of deep discussion about a character who has not much screen time.
Yeah, maybe 5 minutes.
Yeah,
maybe.
But it also is very thematic too, with just the whole story. Every character is having to face the consequences for their rigid behavior.
Yep.
And when they allow themselves to step out and wonder, what if I lean into this feeling? What if I lean into my anxiety? What if I lean into this confusion and this awkwardness? What if I lean into, my remorse, right? We kind of have this moment where we can connect and we can kind of live more authentically, and we can kind of step into something in a new way, and it can be refreshing.
Absolutely. Any other things that stood out in the movie? I have one.
I do.
Okay.
And did you notice the inconsistencies with Woody feeling pain?
Oh, okay. I know. I saw that in your notes, and I was like, I did notice it. I didn't put much stock into it, though.
It was really weird because, like, one moment, right, he's getting thrown off the bed, he's being played with and nothing, and he gets a magnifying glass to his forehead, and he's screaming, running and dunking his head in the water. So I just thought it was curious.
So the last thing we can probably talk about is when Buzz crawls into the Pizza Planet. When Buzz crawls into the alien container.
Yes.
Because my mom loved the aliens. Like, that was a big thing. So there's some like memories and some nostalgia with that.
Yeah.
But when he stands above them and just that, I call it like the sheep mentality, right?
Yeah.
That there's like the deity that
yes.
they worship and they take care of, and they're so stuck, right?
Yes.
In their thing, like what you were just saying, like getting really stuck in spaces that I was like, how often are we the alien? Like, are we the alien or are we Buzz? Right? Okay. Like, are we standing like above the crowd, kind of being authentic to ourselves, searching for our spaceship, right? Because he's being authentic to himself. Crazy, but being authentic to himself. Or are we just a sheep kind of just waiting for the next thing to happen?
Okay.
That's the way I took it. Like, deep.
And I think at some of the same. I think my notes, I think it said herd mentality. So we're definitely on the same page there. And something that kind of, that I thought about was in their structure, somewhere and someone along the way created this idea that we wait here and the claw is what gets us to leave. And so in that same way, right, you're talking about how Buzz is in active pursuit of his rocket ship, his mobility, where all the aliens are sitting in one place saying that the thing that provides the mobility is what we have to respect. Yeah. So it's like almost like where we put our internal control. Is it external or internal?
So it makes me think. I was telling you about this earlier. Listening to Joseph Campbell's stuff, and one of the things that he stood out is like how we start the hero's journey, right? There's multiple ways, multiple catalysts to the hero's journey,
Absolutely.
Right? And I think that scene demonstrates the two of the types of ways you can start a hero's journey, right? Yeah. So Buzz is on an active pursuit for something, right? He's actively looking. He's missing something within him, right? So he's searching, and then the aliens are waiting for the catalyst to happen. They're going about their life, waiting. The claw comes, the journey starts.
Yeah.
Right? Which I think speaks so much to even why people come to therapy.
Yeah.
Some people will come to therapy because they're searching to know themselves better. They're searching to understand something. They're longing to live a different life. Like, there's an active journey. I work with a lot of couples and do couples counseling. I would say the couples are the opposite. They're going along fine, and then something happens. There's a big fight. We don't know if this is working, and that's the catalyst for change. So even being curious about ourselves and our own journey we're on, like, what is our catalyst? Like, what starts us off on our hero's journey? Like, are we just waiting for the claw to come? Are we just waiting for something to happen? Or are we actively doing it? And neither one's not better than the other.
Yeah.
They just are. But being curious about it, I think, would be really interesting to know about ourselves.
Yeah, that last comment about one's not better and one's not right. They're all ways that bring us to a point of challenging who we are, knowing where we began. Because once we realize what kind of journey we are on, we have all these archetypal images and stories that we can connect to. So if I'm the one who is waiting, and when I get called to action, there's a lot of stories we have about people who have been kind of transplanted into a situation and just have to figure it out.
Yep.
Versus the one who barrels in asking all the questions. So once we, I think, can align to a narrative, we can start to talk about it.
Yeah.
And we can start to feel that ease because we kind of know the skeleton of where we're heading.
And if we apply this hero's journey and these catalysts, the same thing the same thing can apply to Buzz at the beginning. The same thing can apply to Woody. And that's the cool thing about understanding myths is they keep showing up in new ways. And all the stories that we watch now kind of tell very similar myths. And that's why the hero's journey kind of fits everything, right? Dan Hartman, when he writes Rick and Morty, every episode fits a hero's journey. Yeah. And he has a very specific way he writes those shows. And that's where I think the more you pay attention to these things, the more you're going to start to learn about yourself.
Yes. I think it allows us to tap into a sense of clarity that's pretty calming. I think so when we find ourselves not being compelled, when we're not torn and pulled in different directions, but instead have control over that, I think that comes from understanding our story and where we're at on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else? Or are we done? We're good? That's all you have?
That's all I've got.
That's all I have too.
Yeah.
So we're right about that time.
Yeah, I think we're done.
Okay. Well, with that, make sure you subscribe to your podcast player. If you leave us a 5-star review, we will be giving away prizes. You can check out at thedisneytherapist.com/review, and you will see how to get a prize, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, and I'm excited to see kind of what kind of responses we get. I love interacting with that. This is clearly stuff that I can talk about forever. So the conversation can continue. Just ask the questions.
Yes, absolutely. And that we will see you next time.